And so we continue our journey of looking at the basic conditions required for healing. We've looked at pure air, we're looking now at sunshine. In our last lecture we looked at sunshine, and now we're looking at temperance. Not a word you hear very much now, but the dictionary definition of temperance is not taking anything into the body that will harm it and taking in moderation the good things. So that gives us a list of things that should never be done or never be taken into the body, and a list of things that should be taken in moderation. Really, all good things should be taken in moderation. So we'll say all good things, because even good food can turn to poison if overdone. I have a book in our library called The Physiology of Digestion by Dr. William Beaumont. And he came to the conclusion after decades of research on the stomach, he said it is not quality of food that is of the most important, it's quantity. So even good food can be overdone. All work and no play makes Jack a very dull boy. We've come to a strange time on planet Earth where it surprises me how parents are not teaching their children to work. And you know when children love to work? When they're little. And most parents don't take use of that. You see, the day doesn't come when the child suddenly stands in front of the parent and says, "I'll work now." I always taught my children to work from a young age. I taught them that they were part of the family firm. And if a child dirties a dish as they eat their dinner, they should be part of cleaning that dish. Very simple basics. You see, and when a parent teaches a child to work, they've got time to play with them. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, and all play and no work makes Jack a very poor boy. So you could say it's a balance, moderation in these things. But there are some things that should never enter the human body if you're looking for optimum performance. And I consider the pure crystallized acid that's been extracted from the sugarcane plant one of the most lethal substances ever to be introduced to the human frame. Why do I say that? Well, sugar is as closely related to the sugarcane plant as heroin is to the poppy plant, and yet really more lethal. Let me show you. When sugar goes into the body, blood glucose levels rise dramatically. Not in sugarcane, because in the sugarcane, the sugar or the glucose is all bound up in fibre and it's slowly released. But this pure acid that's been extracted from the sugarcane plant, when it's taken into the body, how would it have been taken into the body? What would most Aussies have had for breakfast this morning? Cereal. I challenge you, find a cereal with no sugar. Some of them are incredibly high. Blood glucose levels rise dramatically. Very quickly, the pancreas responds by releasing insulin to get the blood glucose levels down. Because it was a crisis and too much insulin was released, because there was so much glucose, blood glucose levels start to drop too low. This is a crisis. And this is a crisis. Now blood glucose levels are too low. And so the brain says to the pancreas, quick, stop the insulin and release the glycogen. Glycogen is the hormone that gets the blood glucose levels up again. But the person usually has a little bit more sugar down there. So up they go again, now too high. So the brain says to the pancreas, now we're too high. Stop the glycogen, release the insulin. And we've got a situation now where many people's blood sugars levels are doing this all day long instead of this. Instead of a nice, steady, sure, consistent supply of nutrients, we get too high, too lows, and basically crisis, 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 crisis. And what's happening is the cell starts to resist the insulin. Let's go back to the cell. So here is the cell. We've got our 20-step pathway, and then we've got our 8-step pathway. And over on the side, we've got our glycogen stores, the quick-release glucose stores. And what happens is, when the insulin's released to get the glucose into the cell, and if the energy cycle is full and the glycogen stores are full, then a situation happens where the cell begins to resist insulin. It's called insulin resistance. And what happens when you've got insulin resistance happening? The glucose stays in the blood. The message is given to the pancreas, more insulin, so more insulin's released. See, we've got this vicious cycle. And eventually the pancreas just stops releasing the insulin. We've got 400 new diabetics diagnosed every day in Australia. It's an epidemic on this high sugar diet. I challenge you, go to the supermarket, it's in everything. Especially with the fat phobia that's hit Australia and has for the last 20 years. When they take all the fat out of a food, they've taken all the flavour out. For instance, yogurt. How many non-fat, low-fat yogurts do you find? Now they're not palatable at all, so what do they do to make them palatable? They add a bit of sugar. Now that person that eats that low-fat yogurt, sparked with sugar to make it palatable, now their body's dumping a dangerous fat, which we talked about yesterday. You see the predicament. But something else has come in. You see, Aussies have been using sugar for decades. Something else has come into the equation that has caused this explosion of diabetes. It is wheat. Now, the wheat I'm referring to is the wheat that you will find in every pasta, every bread, every biscuit, every cake, every cereal. And what that does is it contains a starch. Now, the wheat that is found today is a hybridized wheat. It was hybridized in the 1950s. Dr. Norman Bulag received a Nobel Prize in 1969 for this hybridized wheat. And in the 1970s, that hybridized wheat went worldwide. And that's why I say every bread, every wheat product you find today, it will be the hybridized wheat. Tomorrow, I'm going to discuss the gluten aspect of this hybridized wheat. But what I want to show you this morning is the starch aspect. And the starch that is in wheat is amylopectin, amylopectin A, it's called. And amylopectin A gets the blood sugar level up very quickly, like that. That's your amylopectin A. Amylopectin B is found in bananas and potatoes. And for those who are familiar with the glycemic index of food, the glycemic index of food is where the sugar is released into the blood. Anything above 55 is high, anything below 55 is low. And banana and potatoes are quite high. So amylopectin B is found in bananas and potatoes, and that gets it up quite high. It's basically like that. And amylopectin C is what you find in legumes, and amylopectin C is a blood sugar level like this. So it's the amylopectin A, it's this specific starch that you'll find in the hybridized wheat. Look what it's doing to blood sugar levels. In fact, if this is sugar's blood sugar levels, this is wheat's, because of this amylopectin A, this type of starch that is in the hybridized wheat. Let's look at the glycemic index. So GI, glycemic index, how quickly the food breaks down to glucose in the blood. Anything above 55 is high. So 55 basically is baseline. Cherries are about 26. So cherries are nice and low. So let's have a look at sugar. And I'm referring to the pure crystallized acid that's been extracted from the sugarcane plant. That's 59. And that does not surprise us. Where's white bread? And there's an American nutritionist, he's got a saying, he says, the whiter the bread, the sooner you're dead. But that's changing when you see this. White bread is 69. Because of this amylopectin A, can you see that white wheat bread is higher than even refined sugar? Wholemeal bread. Where does wholemeal bread sit? Wholemeal bread is 72. 72. Wholemeal bread gets the blood sugar level up higher than white bread? How could this be? It's because the wholemeal bread, not being refined, it has more amylopectin A in it. You see that? And what are most diabetics told to eat? Wholemeal bread, whole grain cereal. And you talk to diabetics, they're not conquering their diabetes. We have seen many people conquer their diabetes. We had a man come here for the last 2 weeks. Halfway through the program, after 1 week, he stopped his insulin because his blood sugar levels were averaging 6 every morning. He'd never seen that. So he stopped his insulin. Halfway through the 2nd week, he stopped 2 more of his diabetic medications. So halfway through the 2nd week, he's off all his diabetic medication, and his blood sugar levels, they didn't stay at 6, they came up a little bit, but I said, don't you worry about it, you're coming off the medication. He said, I used to be 23. He said, the highest level I got here at the health retreat was something like 9. That's remarkable, and that's off his medication. If you want to pursue this subject, you can pursue it a little bit more in a book called Wheat Belly by Dr. William Davis, where he shows very clearly the research that is showing that. And this explains why the wheat is getting these highs, higher even than banana and potatoes that are well acknowledged to get blood sugar levels up quickly. And diabetics are usually told to stop potatoes and to stop bananas, but they're not told to stop the wheat. Why not? Because this is not universally known, but you can know it by reading Dr. William Davis' book, Wheat Belly, where he shows it very clearly. You know why the book's called Wheat Belly? Because these blood sugar level highs that wheat's causing is causing it to all store as fat on the belly. That's the book, Wheat Belly. Caffeine. How does caffeine affect the body in a negative way? Let me show you. This is a nerve cell, and we have 1 trillion of these in our brain. This is what our brain is made up of, nerve cells. This is the arm that comes out of the nerve cell called the axon. These are the little filaments on the end. These are the boutons. And here we have the next nerve cell. These are the receiving stations called the dendrites. And here are the dendrites here. These cells communicate with each other via little chemical messengers. So the little chemical messengers come in, they're encapsulated, go down the arm into the little boutons, and then they're released out to the next nerve cell, and the whole process is repeated from nerve cell to nerve cell. These messages can be travelling at 200 kilometres an hour. One nerve cell has the ability to communicate with 20,000 other nerve cells. What caffeine does is that it interferes with these neurotransmitters. One neurotransmitter is adenosine. And adenosine is the neurotransmitter that acts like the brakes. Our brain runs according to precision balance, and anything that interferes with the brakes is potentially dangerous. When caffeine goes in, adenosine levels drop. Brakes are failing. Body's got to do something. So it quickly develops extra little receptor sites on the dendrites to grab every bit of adenosine that comes through. Then the person comes to Misty Mountain Health Retreat, Adenosine levels go back to normal. Receptor sites get flooded. Oh, does that hurt? People say to me, Barbara, do you drink coffee? I say, no, I just watch the people suffer. Day 1 of Misty Mountain Health Retreat. If someone says to me, Barbara, how can I prepare for my stay at Misty Mountain? I say, start reducing the coffee. Start reducing any caffeine. Let me define caffeine in coffee, in tea, in Red Bulls, all your energy drinks. There's not much in chocolate, but most people, I say most women that I meet, can't stop at 1 square. So a whole block of chocolate, you're starting to get there. Caffeine also affects another neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that has to do with brain function, and it rises under the effect of caffeine. That's why a lot of people say, oh, I can't do my work unless I've had my cup of coffee. It just gets my brain working. That is true. It does get it working. But very quickly the brain says, we've got an imbalance here. Stop making so much acetylcholine. So there might be an initial rise and then there's always a corresponding dump. The other neurotransmitter is dopamine. Dopamine is an interesting hormone because dopamine is not a happiness hormone, it's a pursuit of happiness hormone. It actually gets us to pursue happiness. It rises under the effect of caffeine. Many addictive substances release dopamine, and that is what causes a person to go for the next cup of coffee, for the next cigarette, for the next drink of alcohol, for the next drug. Dopamine, it's the pursuit of happiness, it's the pursuit of reward hormone. It's dopamine that gets me weeding my garden, but then I get my reward of a weeded garden. So it's not that dopamine's bad, but in the case of addictions, it's actually overused for the person to keep going and getting the pursuit of happiness, but they never find happiness. Eventually, when a person is continually having coffee day after day after day, dopamine levels get exhausted. And then the pursuit of happiness is not there. And what a person eventually experiences is an inability to even do anything. Caffeine dramatically interferes with the neurotransmitters in the brain. The definition of depression is a chemical imbalance in the brain, and caffeine is one of the most responsible for that. I will be exploring the effect of caffeine on the brain in more detail in my lecture on the mind. Suffice to say now, this is best kept out of the body. Mercury. Mercury is a neurotoxin. There's no safe dose of mercury. About 50% of dentists today are still using mercury. But I don't know about you, but I don't want a neurotoxin anywhere near me. You've heard of Mad Hatter's disease? Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland. Hatters went mad because they used to glue the felt hats together with mercury. And of course it went in through their skin, and this neurotoxin started killing brain cells, even eating away at the myelin sheath, which is that fatty substance around the arm coming out of the nerve cell. A person is in a very dangerous situation if they're on a fat-free diet and they've got high mercury levels, for instance, mercury fillings in the mouth, or they're having a high fish diet, especially the larger the fish. You see, mercury is bioaccumulative. That means that the more mercury that is going into the body, the more it is accumulating. And this is why it's the larger fish that have the highest concentration of mercury. So for people that love fish, I say keep it to a small part of the diet and just go for your smaller fish. The smaller the fish, the smaller the concentration of mercury. It's the fish and the fillings, the two F's, where most people are subject to mercury today or exposed to mercury. Just remember, there's no safe dose of it, and it is a neurotoxin.